Zombie runner, Bobby Shans, effectively wild.
Joey Meneses,
No.
walk-off 3-run digger.
Stop it.
Walk-off 3-run shot.
Oh my God.
Meg, he's the best player in baseball.
Effectively wild.
Hello and welcome to episode 2466 of Effectively Wild, a FanGraphs baseball podcast brought to you by our Patreon supporters. I'm Meg Rowley of FanGraphs, and I'm joined by Ben Lindbergh of The Ringer. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing well, and the extension spree continues.
Yeah.
We've got another one, another top prospect early in his big league life, signing a long-term deal. Now it is Kevin McGonigle, who just barely beat Connor Griffin to the big leagues, and Connor Griffin barely beat Kevin McGonigle to an extension. So The Tigers have signed McGonigle to an 8-year, $150 million deal. This is slightly higher than the Griffin deal, which was $140 million guaranteed, and that was 9 years, right?
Yeah.
So the difference, I guess, with this one, well, there are a few little differences. McGonigle is a couple years older than Griffin, and this contract starts next season. So
Correct.
McGonigle is on league minimum salary for 2026, starts next season, runs through 2034. And as in the Griffin deal, there's $10 million in potential escalators, and there's a $14 million signing bonus, and there are other additional details about the distribution of the salaries over the lifetime of the deal. But this fits into the trend that we've been talking about with Cooper Pratt and with Connor Griffin and others, just lots of long-term deals. So Colt Emerson of the Mariners, of course. So what do you make of this one? McGonigle's off to a fantastic start, by the way. He looks, completely like he belongs. Just great surface stats. He's walked more than he's struck out. He appears to be ready fully.
Yeah, he's the real deal, I think. Yeah. I'm trying not to overreact, or maybe overreact is the wrong way of characterizing it, sort of over-index on any of these, because there still aren't very many of them, you know? Like, I think because we've had this run of either early big league career extensions or pre-debut extensions, you know, some like Emerson still at AAA, that it can feel like all of the best guys are doing this, that this is the approach that every team is taking to their top prospects. And it's still a vanishingly small percentage of guys who are getting money. I remain heartened that none of these deals feel like, oh boy, your agent's doing a bad job. You're getting ripped off, like that doesn't feel quite like what's going on here. I remain curious. Maybe that's a judgment-free way of putting it. I remain curious about what the long-term impact on arbitration is likely to be with all of these pre-debut extensions, which will be difficult to tease out, and gosh, who knows what arbitration will even look like, a year from now. Hopefully a settled matter, decided matter, because that would imply that we have a CBA. You have background anxiety and it just attaches to different things. And today, that's what mine's working on. I think it'll be hard to disentangle and sort of parse, hey, this guy going through ARB is getting this amount because of the absence of middle infield, high-profile young players who should be ARB 2 but are in year 3 or 4 of this extension that they signed. But I remain curious and a little nervous about that. And it sort of stands in sharp contrast to, I think, an earlier story that we were interested in this year, where we were part of what we were happy about, or what I was happy about. You hated it famously. No, that's not what I mean. But I would characterize it that way for myself. Part of why I was glad that Tarek Skubal had prevailed in his arbitration dispute with the Tigers was not only that he was setting this new standard, but that he had he had gone through the process, right? That he had been willing to risk losing in order to set that new standard. And I do think that there's labor value in these guys participating in that system and sort of establishing high comps because, you know, these deals aren't really in the purview of those conversations in most cases. So that part of it sort of sits out a distance from this. But, you know, this makes a ton of sense. This is $150 million. That's more money than I'll ever see, which doesn't mean that we aren't grateful for the patronage of our patrons, but we're realistic. Like that would be crazy to expect. So, you know, it's a lot of money. I think he's a very good player. I think when you have confidence that you know not only the caliber of player that a guy is likely to be, but have confidence in sort of his ability to contribute in a positive way to your franchise on the field, reputationally, if you can come to a deal that makes sense, that makes a ton of sense. And, you know, if you're Kevin McGonigle, well, hey, you're having like the best month of your life, right? You debut in the majors. It's going great. You look like you've been there your entire life. And now you know the start next year, you're going to make $150 million over the course of your contract. And, you know, he will turn 22 this August. And so he will be on the upper end of that, like, hey, you can really get something in free agency, but it's not like he's going to hit free agency and be an old man unable to get another good contract, assuming the rest of his career unfolds the way that this contract suggests it will. So like, I think it's good for him. I think it's fine. And I think the way that I want to score it or grade it in terms of what it means for baseball as a labor market remains sort of incomplete and TBD, but something I'm keeping an eye on because, you know?
Yeah, I've wondered about what this will mean for free agency. Right. And you're right.
They're going to be so boring. Some of these years, Ben, are going to be so dull. Some of these free agent
classes are really going to be just bereft. And so that's kind of, I don't know if that's good or bad. You could say that that's bad in terms of entertaining people in the offseason, but it might be good in the sense that some of these teams just get to hang on to their guys for longer. But it does mean that maybe more and more of success will derive from developing and signing your own players rather than just spending, which on the whole maybe could depress spending, but just does kind of change team construction and how one actually ends up with a winning team. And then I think also because, as you said, it's not as if Griffin and McGonigle are off the open market for their careers. They are young enough that they can still become free agents and still be young enough that they could cash in long term. Of course, they could sign subsequent extensions. They might never become free agents, but that path is still open to them. And it's always been fairly rare. It's fairly rare that you get the young free agent, the guy who hits the open market when he's, 26 or something. It happens. You get your Juan Sotos and you get, Ohtani and people with somewhat unusual circumstances, or they debut super young, Bryce Harper, just guys who are still in their physical primes when they reach free agency. But that's never been the norm, really. So if you're missing out on some guys, and those are the guys who would sign the super long-term mega deals or would have in the past. Again, now sometimes the elite free agents, they sign the high average annual value, low years deals. But if they wanted to just have the highest number, then those are the guys who could really run up the price tag. But those guys might not. We might see even fewer of the, say, 26, 27-year-old free agent superstars than we used to. But what really interests me here is, you mentioned these are not the old style extensions where you would say, is this guy getting good advice? Is anyone looking out for this guy's interests? Extensions were kind of conditioned to think of the early career extension as almost invariably team friendly. But the more of these are signed, the less that is bound to be true. And there's been a bit of research and writing about this that I've linked to and mentioned in previous episodes. Neil Payne wrote about this last year when Roman Anthony signed his deal. Andrew Ball, the former assistant GM for the Astros, wrote about this recently. The idea that now the pendulum has swung to the other side, where we used to talk about, is the player getting ripped off here? Is the team getting a sweet deal? And now you could almost frame it as, does this make sense for the team to do? Are teams even getting a discount anymore? Not that you have to get a discount to sign a deal. You could just get the certainty of continuing to employ that player and build around that superstar and everything. But just from a pure surplus value standpoint, looking at production versus free agent dollars per win or whatever, there's clearly been a change just because players have wised up and their agents have wised up. And so they're not going to just fork over a bunch of possible earnings to teams. And you also have some mechanisms, bigger bonuses and maybe just like the pre-arbitration bonus pool in some ways for players to get paid a little bit earlier, and prospect promotion incentive and such. And so maybe there's a little less incentive for some of these guys to sign unless they really do get a good deal. So Andrew Ball was arguing that he thinks, if anything, teams are maybe handing out more extensions that are in their own best interests. And he noted that some teams, like big market teams, the Dodgers, the Yankees, they've never signed players to early career or pre-debut or pre-arb extensions like this.
Right. They allocate that money in free agency. They don't do it pre-free agency.
Yes. Yeah. And so they don't really need to get that kind of cost certainty, because although there's cost certainty, there's also the risk, because you're getting 3 free agent years here of what would have been free agent years for Kevin McGonigle. And if he is as good as he seems to be, well, he would be making a ton of money in those years, and you're going to get him for a little less than he would have signed then. But that's several years down the road. And so there is always risk, and there are prospects who look great and even come out of the gate fast, and yet they slow down and they slump or they get hurt or whatever it is. It just doesn't pan out. So even with a number 1 or number 2 overall prospect in baseball, there's still some uncertainty. And when you're talking about signing someone 6 years or 5 years or whatever it is before they would reach free agency, then you certainly are assuming some risk. So it's possible that we're all kind of anchored to this idea that, the pre-arb extension, that's inherently going to benefit the team. Maybe it doesn't. But I think, and Ball kind of touched on this, I think maybe for some teams at least, the Yankees and the Dodgers, maybe they can afford to wait. Right. Because they can just wait and see which superstars reach free agency. Now, I guess if we do end up at a point where superstars are rarely reaching free agency, then they might be in a bit of hot water unless they continue to develop their own homegrown guys, because they won't just be able to pluck the priciest players from other organizations. But they don't have to kind of lock in a potential discount. They can wait and survey the market and see who's good and see what their needs are, and then go get those guys. They can just go sign Kyle Tucker when they need an outfielder, sign Edwin Diaz when they need a closer. But if you are a smaller market team that might not be able to outbid any other club for a free agent, then maybe there continues to be some benefit in just keeping that player off the open market. So maybe that's why we're seeing, the Pirates, they want Connor Griffin. The Brewers, they want Cooper Pratt. And now, I don't know if you'd call the Tigers small market. I mean, I guess on the smaller end. And so, sure, they can lock up Kevin McGonigle, and the Diamondbacks could keep Corbin Carroll or whoever, right? And so, I think even though we've seen the Red Sox sign some of these guys too, and Anthony and Campbell, which may or may not work out that well, and Rafaela and others, that maybe we will just see this become kind of a smaller market team tactic to keep their players away from the Dodgers and Yankees of the world, who would be ready to swoop in and sign them away.
Boston is a fascinating example of this. Part of it is definitely the broader payroll circumstance at the club. And I think that, if you pull up the Tigers payroll page on Roster Resource, after next year, they don't really have very much committed payroll. I mean, they have some, certainly, but it's less than you might expect. And so some of it, I'm sure, is just, hey, we can afford to be paying Kevin McGonigle $2 million, $8 million. I know that the AAV hit for tax purposes is different, but like, we can afford to be sort of structuring these deals out because we do have room in it. Are they really going to exercise Framber Valdez's $40 million mutual option? I don't know. He and them might not like each other in 2029. Who knows? But they probably want to be in the Kevin McGonigle business. But like, Boston is interesting because they did a number of these deals, but they're all sort of rational relative to one another in terms of their scale, right? Like Christian Campbell, you're right. That deal might end up not working out very well, but guess what? He got meaningfully less money than Roman Anthony got. And that makes sense because even though, he was a top 100 prospect and people were enthusiastic about him, even the people who were enthusiastic about him recognized, hey, this is kind of a weird swing. Like the fact that this is working for him seems to indicate that it might keep working for him, but there's obvious risk involved in the profile. Just look at the way that his approach plays out, right? So I think that teams are pretty good and pretty smart about the way that they think about these extensions relative to one another. You have a similar example in the Tigers case, right? Colt Keith got a lot less money than Kevin McGonigle did. And that makes sense. Kevin McGonigle is a better player than Colt Keith. And like the fact that I feel comfortable saying that, even though Kevin McGonigle has been in the majors for 3 weeks, is probably indicative of the gap, right? I think that they are thinking about it rationally. I think that for teams that aren't necessarily going to be able to counter in the free agent market, that might have a willingness to spend, Detroit went out and got Framber Valdez. Part of that was that, he lingered on the market longer than people expected him to, but given the opportunity to get a guy who they thought could really help to reinforce their rotation, give him a true number 2, a guy who'd be a number 1 for other clubs, they were willing to do that. They did it on a short deal, right? So I think you're right that there's even for teams that are maybe smaller mid-market, but have a understanding of their competitive window as open and that they want to push in chips where it makes sense, they don't have an endless ability to counter. Like they might be able to make a competitive offer, but when you have the Dodgers or the Mets hanging around going like, no, but we really want Kyle Tucker though. Sorry. Like, we're just going to go get us a Kyle Tucker. We're going to do a weird contract so he can hit the market again. We're fine with that. We'll pay him a bunch of money up front. Then we'll have a Kyle Tucker. It's like, okay, well, what do I do with that? You can sign Kevin McGonigle because Kevin McGonigle has way more incentive to sign a deal right now. And you think he's going to be really good. And to your point, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to go counter. You just get to have a Kevin McGonigle.
The other interesting thing, maybe it's not surprising, but it is kind of funny, in Andrew Ball's post, which I will link to, he had a link of all of the players who have signed extensions when they had less than half a year of Major League service. And it's 20 guys going back to the trailblazing Evan Longoria extension. And 19 of them are non-pitchers. So
right, yeah.
There's Matt Moore, who was the second guy on this list, also with the Rays back in 2011.
Whoops.
And that's, yeah, exactly. And that's it. It's all just position players all the way down, which I guess makes sense because they're just so much more stable, durable, predictable. Not that things can't go wrong with them, and this list does include some we have mentioned, John Singleton and Scott Kingery and Evan White and others. Eloy Jimenez, who's back in the big leagues now. Congrats to him. I'm regretting.
Oh, is he really?
Yeah, he's up with the Blue Jays, who need all the help they can get. Just, bring in Lenyn Sosa from the White Sox, bring in Eloy Jimenez. I am ruing not drafting him in the minor league free agent draft because he was, I believe, eligible. And I saw the name. It jumped out at me. Hey, Eloy Jimenez. And I
You're
decided,
like, a name I know on this giant list.
Yeah. Anyway, 19 guys. It's all hitters. And I will be curious to see, now that we see more and more of these, will we see any pitcher ones? Because you could presumably price in the uncertainty and just have the dollar amount be commensurately low or have it be not as long term or something. So you could account for the fact that you just can't project them with as much confidence. But it seems like no teams have wanted to be in the business of signing young pitchers to long-term extensions. You'd think the pitchers, though, if they're conscious of the risk and arm injuries and everything, that they might be more motivated to do this. So I wonder if there might even be, if it turns out that position players are holding out for their fair value now, maybe teams could pivot to pitchers and say, hey, if you want to get yourself some certainty, then we would sign you to an early extension. You'd have to maybe take a discount here. But yeah, maybe it's just there's so much uncertainty and the error bars are so big that no one feels confident enough to project anything.
I think that probably what you might find would be that the number where a team feels like they have adequately priced in the risk puts you at such a discount that pitchers would be like, why would I do this? You know, and maybe there is an argument to be made that, especially if it's something in the 6 to 8 year range where what you're buying out is, you know, the pre-free agency team control and then a year or two of free agency, that you're still in better shape doing it if you're the pitcher, just because you could catastrophically injure yourself in a way that just derails your entire career. But I suspect, knowing what we do about the mentality of baseball players, that it might be too low an offer for it to really resonate with them and their representation. But maybe not. I mean, it makes the risk piece of it is profound, but the benefit of these super long deals, and, you know, is 6 years super long deals, right? These long deals is that you can like absorb a Tommy John in there. You know, if you have a guy signed for 8 years and he's quite young and you feel confident that he would be able to bounce back from injury, even if you only end up getting him for 6 of the 8, well, you know, you got him for 6 of the 8 years and he was great. And so, and you always need pitching, you know. Someone smart I know told me that. Only guy who's ever said it.
Yes.
So,
well, some have since copied me, but yeah, it's true.
And never with sufficient attribution. Those scoundrels. But, you know, I think I understand that more from the team side even than the player side, but I really just don't think you'd be able to meet like a good equilibrium point between priced in risk on the team's end and it being sufficiently compelling on the player end. But I could be wrong. I didn't think that all of these like very highly regarded young guys would necessarily be in this extension business either. But I also didn't expect Kevin McGonigle to get $150 million. So maybe it was a lack of imagination on my part, Ben.
Yeah. Yeah, I do feel like that even when an established big league pitcher signs as a free agent for however many years, I mentally discount it. I kind of think like, he signed for 8 years. Well, if you could get 5 or 6 out of him, you know, which is maybe how teams are thinking of it too.
I think it is how teams are thinking of it.
Yeah. So Jesus Mate, Leo DeVries, JJ Weatherholt, you're next. Max Clark, I guess. You know, people are probably reaching out to them if they haven't already to see if they want to be the next to sign these sorts of extensions. You know, one pitcher who signed a free agent deal, we talked about him recently, Tatsuya Imai. He has made some headlines in recent days, not for the best reasons health-wise. He has some arm fatigue, at least. He's getting the arm checked out after that one outing he had against the Mariners. He also has talked pretty frankly about some difficulties that he's had in adjusting, not just to the competition, to the baseball, but culturally. And that's always been an issue, you know, whether it's the size of the baseball itself being different, the schedule for starting being a bit different, probably less different than it used to be. In Japan, there's usually a 6-man rotation and you just start once a week. And now that's increasingly common in the majors. So he's making most of his starts now for the Astros when he does start on 5 days of rest. So that's kind of equivalent. But there are all sorts of differences and potentially difficulties here.
Yeah. And
it sounds as if he's been a bit out of sorts. And, you know, he or his interpreter was saying the travel's different from the way it is Japan.
Sure.
There's more travel. There's longer travel, obviously. bigger country. The timing when the players eat. So in Japan, when they get back to the hotel, they eat their dinner. Here, the players eat at the stadium before they go back to their hotel, which doesn't sound like that big a deal. But all of these things, routine can be pretty important to players.
Yeah,
and
man.
so you change any aspect of that routine. And he seemed to be doing fine in spring training, and he was getting along with everyone on the team. Chandler Rome just wrote about this for The Athletic, and he was pitching okay, though he did mention the difference with the baseballs, the slicker balls, those slick MLB balls compared to the NPB balls. Anyway, it sounds as if this has kind of come to a head now after he has had a couple rough starts. He also had one good start, but
He did have one good start.
yeah, that plus the fatigue. And also, Chandler noted that he's gone through 3 interpreters since the start of spring training, or he's on his 3rd interpreter. I don't know how much of that is his decision versus the team providing different people. It does sort of surprise me that there isn't more turnover among interpreters just because.
Well, especially now, you're very nervous.
Well, yes.
I don't mean to impugn everyone who participates in the profession.
No.
As far as we know, only one fraudster amidst the
And most
interpreting
interpreters
crew.
are just pure interpreters and not like taking care of your entire life and also possibly defrauding you in the process. But but it's such a personal thing, like someone who is speaking for you.
Yes.
And also, as we have relayed at times, interpreters, they differ in their style, of course, and Imai's current latest interpreter was interpreting in a way where he was using third-person pronouns. He wasn't sort of directly interpreting for Imai and speaking as Imai in the first person, but saying he is not able to adjust to the American lifestyle, baseball and outside of baseball. And the interpreter even said that's probably the reason for his arm fatigue, so suggesting that those cultural differences might have impacted his on-field performance. But I've heard from people who speak Japanese and they watch Will Ireton with the Dodgers or any of these other interpreters. And, you know, sometimes some of them are more verbatim than others. And some of them are just sort of, it's a summary more so than a direct, here's exactly what was said. And some are just more painstaking and literal about it. And weren't you saying back when we were talking about Ippei all the time, just like they should get the best, you know, like get the UN interpreters or something, you'd think, just because it's fairly high stakes and, you know, maybe it's worthwhile to the player to actually make sure that your message is being conveyed accurately. And I suppose the player might not always be in the best position to assess that, because if the player doesn't speak English, then they might not know really whether the interpreter is capturing their meaning or not. So they'd have to almost ask someone else who's bilingual, maybe, hey, is this interpreter doing a good job?
Yeah.
But so it's been a lot of flux and change here. And you can understand how that would be different. It's not new for an NPB player or anyone coming over from any different culture or country. And, you know, it's probably even tougher when you're in the minors, and especially back in the day when teams didn't provide as many services and didn't do much of anything to help their players kind of acculturate and, you know, just the basic life skills of I'm a teenager. How do I do anything? So, yeah, I think that has improved, and teams usually have dedicated departments for that sort of thing now, which is good. I think good on a humane level and also good from a development standpoint, probably in a self-serving sort of cynical way. But yeah, you know, sometimes it doesn't seem to affect the guys and they're just successful from the get-go, and others seem to have more trouble with it.
I'm fine, to be clear, with I think the folks who are doing that work at the UN, they should stay at the UN.
Yeah.
I am mindful that that's more important than baseball. But like the next tier down, you know, it's like if they have an opening at the UN and they get like 50 applications and they only end up hiring like 2 people, you know, take the next 4 candidates and be like, have you ever considered a career in sports? You know, do you want to go help out? It seems like it would be such a personal and close relationship, even when it takes on the more typical form that I think most players with their interpreter, and I would say that most teams, it's not like every guy has his own interpreter. Like typically you will have someone on your staff who does that work, and they might have a couple of guys that they speak for, and they might have a couple they don't. And I'm sure it depends on language and some amount of like feel and fit. But if you're like a big star and you're commanding like dedicated resources there, if only because you're going to be speaking to the media with some amount of frequency, I would think you would want consistency. Now, it could be that we don't know why there has been some shuffling here, and it might be that that's what they were searching for, right? A good fit. Someone who Imai like connected with and sort of gelled with. But yeah, it seems like it would be a very challenging thing to hire for and know was going to go well. I would imagine that spring training is a good sort of proving ground for that. But I don't know, it doesn't seem all that strange to me. I think that we tend to associate that adjustment period, that necessary adjustment period, with much younger players, right? Like it's something that you might think of when you're talking about like an international amateur who signs out of Latin America. Like this is a kid, of course there's going to be this huge, tremendous adjustment across. I'll use the term semi-professional just to try to describe the reality of what it is to be an yet signed amateur out of Latin America. But, you're like ostensibly still an amateur, and then all of a sudden you're a professional and you're in a different country once you come to the States, and who knows what your level of fluency is, and you have to figure out like all kinds of stuff. That you have more life skills as an adult. But like it's still a tremendous transition going from a place that you've lived and known your entire life where you're fluent in the language and completely comfortable to somewhere where, you're navigating all of that anew. And even with resources, like it doesn't shock me that would require some amount of adjustment period. So hopefully like, this person he's working with now is like a better fit for him, and the arm fatigue sort of resolves itself, and we get to see Imai like do Imai stuff, because we've already seen what the good version of that looks like here against big league competition, and it's quite impressive. But you can't have him only securing one out. That's a problem.
Yes. And I don't know that any of this is on the Astros, but perhaps it's relevant that Imai is the first player they have signed directly from NPB.
Right.
So maybe being the first is a little bit more challenging than being, the guy who comes along after several previous players have made that leap and your organization has already learned from those experiences. Or just maybe there's a bigger cultural adjustment going to Texas than there is going to Seattle or somewhere, right? Or, if you're on the West Coast and maybe there's a bigger Japanese community, or you're less far from home, or whatever it is. So I don't know. It's not as if we've heard exactly the same thing from Okamoto in Toronto or Murakami in Chicago. And, the White Sox, I don't think had signed an NPB player before either. So I don't know that it's Astros specific, but something that might be worth noting, at least just in case that comes into play. Because, if you've done this before, and if Japanese players, if you're following in the footsteps of countrymen who've made that leap for decades by this point with some organizations, then maybe that makes it easier. Or maybe they're around the team the way that Ichiro is always around the Mariners with his bat broken or intact in his statue, and can just give you some pointers, or you could call someone up. Not that you can't do that, and it would still be relevant to hear from someone who went to a different team, but nonetheless.
And, I think what we're really talking about on some level is like both human adaptability and human connection. Like Ichiro is such an interesting example, because like one of the guys on the current, Mariners team that Ichiro is reportedly closest with is Julio, right? So it doesn't have to be necessarily like to like, but when when people are like, why are all the NPB stars going to the Dodgers? And I was like, well, it feels nice to have people around who speak your language fluently, who aren't only the interpreter. And a number of the Japanese players on the Dodgers have made close friendships with players who speak English, who speak Spanish. Like, I don't mean to suggest a rigidity or what have you that doesn't exist, but it's got to be nice to be able to just have your work friend who knows what you're talking about. That seems very relatable to me, and it can take a lot of forms. And you're right. I don't think that it necessarily says anything specific about the Astros, but it might speak to how valuable it is to, just have someone where you can, like, when you're exhausted at the end of the day and don't want to do the harder work of like trying to communicate with someone in a language you're not fluent in, to be able to just revert to what is familiar to you. That seems very relatable to me. It's like, like when you, at the end of the day and you're talking to your person and you're like, oh my God, I was able to only say 15 words. That was so fantastic. Like, I'm just exhausted and I don't have to say anything more. You know what I mean? Yeah. Dinner's in 15.
Yep. Well, Imai, despite the fatigue, he has averaged 94.8 miles per hour on his four-seamer this year. And that is now average velo in MLB.
Isn't that crazy?
Just a little fastball speed check-in here.
Yeah.
It's nuts. It goes up year after year after year. It's like clockwork. I mean, it's the most dependable uptick, really, in baseball, in sports, in anything. It's going back to 2008, the first year of Pitch FX, when MLB has been providing these values. It is almost every single year the league-wide average fastball speed has increased, four-seamer speed, that is.
Wow.
And there are a couple years there where maybe it went up a lot in one year, and then the next year it went down 1/10 of a mile per hour or something. But then the year after that, it resumed its upward rise. So, yeah, of the 19 seasons that we have pitch tracking info for here, I think it's gone up 16 or 17 of those times. And the only times when it didn't was immediately following a large leap.
Right.
So it's up yet again. And I keep thinking, well, maybe this will be the year that it will actually finally stall and plateau. And the rate of increase has slowed somewhat, but nonetheless, it does just keep pushing higher and higher and higher. So in 2019, it was 93.4. In 2021, it was 93.6. In 2022, it was 93.8. In 2023, it was 94.1. In 2024, it was 94.2. In 2025, it was 94.4. And this year, thus far, it's 94.5. Now, that's using MLB's classifications, the Baseball Savant classifications.
Okay.
And on FanGraphs, you can easily look at different classifications and different data sources. And if you look at the pitch info classifications, so this is you might be familiar with the website Brooks Baseball. Dan Brooks, Harry Pavlidis, who also works at Baseball Prospectus, and they've been doing their own pitch classifications for many years. And in the past, at least, I've regarded them as more reliable than the MLB mostly automated ones. I don't know. I would guess that the gap has closed as the clustering algorithms and everything have probably improved over time. But yeah, if you go by the pitch info settings, then it's even higher, slightly higher than the MLB values, which are at 94.5. And pitch info, I think, has it at 94.7 so far this year. And the other thing to note is that pitch speeds generally do increase over the course of the season.
Right.
And guys get warmed up. The weather gets warmed up. Yeah. Bradley Woodrum of Baseball Prospectus wrote about this just this week. Evidently, the in-season increase league-wide is smaller than it used to be, which might be because guys are just always throwing max effort all the time, even early in the year, or because maybe people are coming in conditioned and doing a better job being fully ramped up when the season starts, or other reasons. But however you slice it, and he did a delta method to control for survivor bias, and you're comparing individual pitchers against each other, not just like the whole pitcher pool, because obviously some guys get called up, some guys get hurt. Anyway, it looks like the difference now, in May, guys tend to add about 1/10 of a mile per hour. In June, they add another 1/10 of a mile per hour. So it used to be about 1/2 a mile per hour the rest of the season that you would add. And now maybe it's about half that. Maybe it's 2/10 or 3/10 of a mile per hour or something. But even if it's that latter smaller number, that suggests if we are potentially at 94.7 or something now, at least depending on one data source, then by the end of the year, we might really be at a point where the average four-seam fastball in MLB is 95 miles per hour, and that maybe even the full season average could get there as soon as next year. If you look at right-handers only, it's already there. Right-handers are already, even in this early young season, sitting 95 for the first time. So it just keeps climbing. It just keeps going up and up and up. And even if you look at all pitches, one thing I was kind of interested in, even though fastballs are getting faster, there are fewer of them being thrown on the whole, because, there's no such thing almost as a fastball count anymore. I guess there still is in a relative sense, but it's much less an ironclad rule than it used to be. And generally, it's harder to hit the bendy stuff. And so pitchers' teams tend to be less fastball forward than they used to be. So I was wondering, okay, so the average fastball speed is going up, but pitchers tend to throw more of what we at least would have called secondary stuff, though for some guys now it's basically primary stuff. So would those kind of counteract each other, and would the overall pitch speed that hitters are facing, would that maybe be down? Because even though the fastball speed is climbing, the fastball rate is decreasing. And it turns out that even though there are fewer fastballs, the fastballs are faster enough, and all the other pitch types are generally faster too.
It's not it's not like there has been, steady state with everything else, and then you just have a steady climb of fastball velo. Everything is getting thrown harder.
Yes. So in 2008, all pitches put together, the average pitch speed was 87.5, and this year thus far, it's 89.4. So even that is up a couple ticks, and that is tied for the highest on record with last year, which was also 89.4. And if we project that the speeds will increase a bit over the course of the season, then it looks like, yes, this will be another new high just for average pitch speed and average fastball speed. So how high can it go? I don't know. There's got to be some natural limit, or maybe there will be changes to roster rules or pitcher usage, or who knows, and maybe that will bring this down a bit, but it seems like it's just going to keep climbing indefinitely, and it is incredible to put it into perspective. We've talked about the pitch flames on the broadcasts, and how a lot of the broadcasts have raised the threshold for flames to 97, 98. We've talked about what it should be, because it used to be 95, and now that's table stakes. That's just your garden variety heat. It's not even heat. It's room temperature in the majors now is 95. It's nuts.
Yeah, it's at a temperature where you could water a plant with it and not worry about it. Or it suggests that it suggests a number of things, but the one that I always find the most striking is that for all the consternation we have as an industry, and I'm using the royal we here because it's something that writers worry about. It's obviously something that team people are concerned about. It's something that players are grappling with. For all our concern about pitcher injuries and the prevalence of pitcher injuries and the number of guys you need to get through a season, it does not seem to be meaningfully impacting the way that they are training for the big league campaign in any given year, right? Yeah. You would think that we would at least be seeing a real plateauing and that it would have started sooner. But no, I think they're still mostly training for velo. That's not the only thing that guys are doing. And I think that, there's variation within the population depending on what they throw and whether they've been injured previously and all kinds of stuff. So I don't want to say that it's one size fits all, but I do think that for all of our, we got to keep them healthy, and for all the panels and committees that the league might assemble, they're still really trying to throw very hard.
And hitters have adapted to that heat to some extent. But yeah, it's tough. Velocity is still kind of king. And one trend that I had not noticed actually has plateaued is the catcher's interference. But there is a notable development. So yeah, we've talked about this multiple times. It's funny. This has been a beat that Jeff Sullivan sort of started, I think. He kind of originated the catcher's interference beat and wrote about it many times. And we talked about it here on Effectively Wild. In episode 2162, we charted the increase over time and talked about the reasons for it. And Sam has kind of picked up the torch from Jeff, and he writes about catcher's interference all the time at his newsletter, Pebble Hunting. And what I had not noticed is that the seemingly inexorable rise of the catcher's interference has been halted. There were fewer catcher's interference calls last year than there had been the season before, which has not been the case for quite a while, I believe. I'm just looking back, just kind of picking a season like 2010, there were 28 instances of catcher's interference. By 2022, there were 74. And then in 2023, there were 96. And in 2024, when we did our check-in, there were 100, so more than the previous season, but barely. And then last year, it was actually down. It went down from 100 to 88. So even though that rise has been halted, at least temporarily, there has been kind of a catcher's interference creep in terms of what is being called catcher's interference. And this is what Sam has exhaustively documented. And there have been many cases of no swing catcher's interference.
Right.
So, and you might think, well, how could it even be catcher's interference if there's no swing? But umpires have seemingly decided, and teams are testing this now, that you can call it that way. But now we have the ultimate, and Sam was tickled, I think, because he had forecasted that this could be a possibility. There had been some close calls. Now we've just got catchers playing footsie with hitters, and that alone, the foot-based contact can cause a catcher's interference call. So the reason why we've seen so much catcher's interference in recent seasons, the primary reason, is that catchers have shifted up in the box because, well, it's better for framing, seemingly, to be able to present that pitch closer to the plate before it has a chance to drop and be further out of the strike zone. And then also now the running game is more of a priority. And so every extra inch closer to second base can help. And maybe there are also batters who have taken my advice and have shifted back a bit in the box thanks to that increased pitch speed that we were just talking about. And so there's just much more proximity between the catcher and the hitter now. And so sometimes we've seen catcher's interference called when there's like a check swing and the bat makes contact with the outstretched catcher's glove and it just kind of glances off the glove. And sometimes you could even get it on a non-swing when you're really just trying to get out of the way of the pitch, but your bat happens to make contact with the glove, and it's really just incidental. And Sam has expressed the thought that that feels wrong, really, to him, that it's being over-applied. Because the thing about this, it's almost like the check swing rules where there's no real rule about what constitutes a swing. And so there's not much specificity when it comes to catcher's interference. The rule book says the batter becomes a runner and is entitled to first base without liability to be put out when the catcher or any fielder interferes with him. And that's it. So what qualifies as interference is really left up to you. So you could interpret that to say if it actually gets physically in the way of the swing, or you could just say it's if it gets in the way of the batter's intent to swing or to do whatever. And, you know, Sam looked this up in the dictionary. He just looked up interfering in his dictionary, and it said to interpose in a way that hinders or impedes. So there's a lot of leeway there for what hinders or impedes. And that's what we've seen now. So we had a call, and I don't know if this is the first ever, but I'm confident that Sam would have documented it if it had happened recently. Chase Mydroth was hitting for the White Sox, and he took a pitch, and he didn't even go around. He didn't even start to swing or anything, but he just took a pitch, And it looks like a totally normal pitch. You would not notice anything amiss if you were just to watch the video.
Yeah.
But if you watch very closely, you see that the tip of the catcher's toe was touching the tip of Mydroth's foot.
Yes.
So he's facing the Rays. It's Rays versus White Sox. And the catcher here, and it's funny because you can see there's like a eagle-eyed, in this case, it's White Sox field coordinator Chris Denorfia, former big leaguer. And he's looking, who, as Sam noted, never drew a catcher's interference. So
it's because he was too busy yelling, Norf!
Maybe so. But Nick Fortes was catching for the Rays, and he had shifted far enough forward that his toe was actually resting on the foot of Mydroth as the pitch was being delivered, like after the pitcher had, Shane McClanahan had gone into his delivery and everything.
Yeah.
And Mydroth didn't seem to be bothered by this, as far as we can tell.
Doesn't even seem to notice that it's there, candidly.
No, he didn't protest. He didn't say anything. He didn't turn around and jaw at the catcher. He took this pitch. It was more or less down the middle, a little bit inside on the inside corner, and Mydroth just stepped back and kind of nodded and, okay, called strike. Seems to be business as usual. But it wasn't, because Denorfia was watching.
The Norf dog.
And he got all excited because he saw, this is it. This is the time we've been waiting for. We can actually challenge this. And there was a previous instance last season that Sam wrote about in December where Justin Turner was hitting for the Cubs and Austin Wells was catching. And the Cubs tried to have this happen, but it was not upheld, the challenge, and it was ruled that it was not a catcher's interference because Wells's foot had made only fleeting contact, seemingly.
Okay.
I mean, Sam was inferring. We don't exactly know why the ruling was what it was, but Wells, his foot had not really rested on Turner's foot. It kind of made contact, and it made contact, I think, prior to the pitcher going into his delivery. So you could argue that it couldn't have really hindered or impeded Turner because this was prior to the pitch actually being delivered.
Got it. Okay.
And Wells, some catchers now, I mean, you have the one knee down is so prevalent, and some guys are like one leg out.
Yeah.
And so that leg also is splayed out forward.
Yeah, they're
and
all splayed back there.
So that was a close call. And Sam sort of expected that we would get this. And now that we have this, in this case, it does appear to be pretty incontrovertible when you watch it from the side angle.
Oh, yeah.
Fortes's toe, it's just like
resting.
It is. It's just fully making contact, at least, and is maybe even like a little bit on top of the tip of Mydroth's foot here. And so Mydroth, he took his base and he was happy to have it, but he did not like gesture to the bench and say, oh, this is the time. But he didn't appear to be confused about what was happening because I guess he confidently took his base because I guess he was aware that the toe had been touching his foot. He must have felt it.
Right. My theory is that he was probably coached by Norf.
Yeah.
Norf. Didn't we call him Norf? Didn't we call him Norf dog?
I
feel like
know.
people did. I feel like people did. Was it me? I don't think so. I think it was other people.
Baseball Reference does have Norf as a nickname for him.
There you go. All right. Yeah. Well, it's always nice to know that, I was going to say that you're not crazy, but it's more that this isn't evidence of that. We'll leave the other diagnosis to the professionals. But I imagine that what Chris Denorfia told his guys in that moment was to not move too much because there's a possibility that, Chase Mydroth feels the foot there. And he's like, if I wiggle, if I draw attention to it, he might move his foot and he might do it in a way that escapes the notice of the umpire. So you got to be a little crafty. You got to trust your dugout. It's like, I've got eyes on this. Don't worry. You just stand there and try to concentrate on hitting. Take your mind to the ball, not the base. And I will notice that you are being lightly played footsie with, and then you'll get to move on down. So I'm sure I'm not sure. I would suspect that he felt it. He knew it was there, and he's like, I just got to be patient. I got to be patient. And Norf has me. Norf's got me covered, much like this part of my foot with his foot.
Yes, Sam speculates that maybe he had not been coached just because he didn't, he seemed sort of surprised that the challenge was being issued, but then when the challenge was issued, he knew what
it was.
Yeah, he knew,
well,
and I think he was.
Undermines my theory.
Well, yeah, I mean, the other thing is that you probably wouldn't want to kind of coach the batter to do it. Like you might coach them to be aware of it or, hey, let us know. But you wouldn't want it because you could, the hypothetical is, well, could the batter then just back up a bit and intentionally make contact and then induce the catcher's interference call? But maybe if it's transparent that that's what you're trying to do.
They won't do it. They won't make the
then
call.
Then it wouldn't actually work. So if you keep Maedroth in the dark, then he's kind of blameless maybe. And I'm torn on this because I doubt that he would have swung at this otherwise, that he would have gotten a hit otherwise. Can you really say that it hindered or impeded him if he didn't appear to have any desire to swing at this ball? But then again,
question.
We can't know what's in the hitter's head. And maybe on some level, maybe even subconsciously, he would have been less likely to swing because the catcher's toe is on his foot. And maybe that could actually obstruct him somehow. So I'm torn between thinking this is kind of ticky-tack and thinking, well, I guess by the spirit of the rule, maybe it's not against the letter of the rule, I guess, because the letter of the law here is left so open to interpretation. But I don't know. And I guess I'm also sort of sympathetic just because, hey, catchers, you have your box and the batter has his box. And as long as the batter is in his box, then you got to stay in your lane, You got to stay back there, right?
Stay back there.
And it's probably for your own safety, you should stay back because you don't want to get hit by a backswing or something. But we'll see whether teams are now more aggressive about challenging when this happens or could conceivably have happened, or whether catchers are told, hey, shift back an inch at least. Don't make it. It's almost tender when you watch it in slow motion. It's like if there were a heated rivalry for MLB. I mean, there's plenty of fiction out there, but
I was going to say, it just hasn't been made into a TV show.
Right. And there was a play. If there's a big screen heated rivalry equivalent for MLB, then you could imagine, it's like Ilya and Shane, the baseball equivalents of them. They're facing each other, but they can't openly, you can't have a public display of affection, but maybe one of them is catching and one of them is in the batter's box and they just, just inch that foot forward, just make a little tender toe touch.
It's very tender. I like that interpretation more than the one I was going to go with. And this maybe speaks to our respective life experiences because I was like, this recharacterizes the batter-catcher interaction to me as one of simmering sibling rivalry where you're like, not touching, can't get mad, not touching, can't get mad, not touching. How close can I get to you before you have to yell at mom and then you smack me and I'm like, why? I never did that. I never worked to get my sister in trouble. That would be psychotic. I would be a monster. We're best friends now. It's fine.
Anyway, something to watch. So I will link to Sam's piece. It's worth, it's worth subscribing in general, but also just worth checking out this specific edition for the videos here. But this was a big day for Sam because obviously he's been tracking this very closely. So we'll see. I think probably they should all just stay in their areas and not actually make contact unless they want to. But no, even if they want to, maybe it's against the rules and they shouldn't in this case. So everyone spread out a bit, stop invading each other's personal space. But also, I don't know. I wonder whether MLB should issue some sort of clarification here for this rule, like what actually has to happen for someone to have been interfered with. Does this count as interference? But I guess I'm open to the interpretation that it did. Yeah. Another interesting little wrinkle here that I think we should discuss. This comes to us from Raymond Chen, who was our guest on our most recent Patreon bonus pod because he is a Patreon supporter and also is the primary caretaker of the Effectively Wild wiki. But he wrote in regular listener capacity here to ask, should we change the ABS challenge signal? And Raymond notes that in the past week, there have been 3 accidental challenges, seemingly. Misinterpretations. So on April 8th, bottom of the first, after his first pitch to George Springer, and I was watching this one live, Shohei Ohtani adjusted his cap, which catcher Will Smith seemed to mistake as Ohtani wanting to issue a challenge. And so Will Smith echoed this gesture for the umpire. And this was a weird one because it was like the first pitch that Ohtani threw, and it wasn't a really egregious call or anything, and it obviously was like super low leverage and everything. So I was thinking, why challenge here? I think there was a weird one like that the other day. Maybe Zach Neto was involved in. So sometimes it's just players kind of jumping the gun on issuing a challenge at an inopportune time, but sometimes it might actually be an accident. So Ohtani adjusted his cap. Will Smith thought, oh, Shohei's trying to call for a challenge. I will call for a challenge here. And there was a challenge, and it was wasted. On April 12th, bottom of the first, after his second pitch to Moises Ballesteros, Bubba Chandler adjusted his cap, which the umpire interpreted as a challenge. And April 12th, same day, top of the fourth, Ben Rice of the Yankees takes a called third strike, tosses his bat, and touches the brim of his helmet, which the umpire interprets as an ABS challenge. And it clearly wasn't one. It was an okay call, and Rice, I think, had accepted it, and he seemed taken aback. I watched both of these. Like, Bubba Chandler was confused. He was like, I didn't mean to. And Ben Rice, same thing. So Raymond says, given that adjusting one's cap or helmet is common and touching one's head is often an unconscious gesture, do you think the signal for an ABS challenge should be changed? And if so, to what? And maybe it actually makes sense because this has happened a few times lately. And this made me recall it actually did happen last year, too, with Jung-Hoo Lee of the Giants. And I was aware of this because I had made the preseason prediction that someone would...
Right, you were very invested.
Yeah. And so I was tracking this, and Chris Hanel and the EW Stats team, they were tracking this. And this seemed like, and ultimately it was a false alarm, but it was mid-April. It seemed like maybe Jung-Hoo Lee had, the challenge system was not actually in play, but it had been in effect in spring training. And so I predicted that someone would gesture for a challenge to mock the umpire, to question the umpire's call. And ultimately that did happen. Taylor Walls did it, and my prediction paid off. But with Jung-Hoo Lee, it was just a miscommunication. And he said through an interpreter, everybody who watches Giants games probably knows that every pitch I adjust my helmet. It's every pitch. And the umpire, Phil Cuzzy, misinterpreted this and thought that he was being shown up. And he said something to Lee, and then they talked about it after the game. And Lee had to clarify, no, I wasn't trying to show you up. That's just the motion that I make all the time. And so Cuzzy then said, I think he told Lee that he shouldn't tap his helmet because you're not allowed to do that. That was at the time interpreted as basically arguing balls and strikes. Right. And so he said, you can't do that. So there is a bit of a language barrier and a miscommunication. So this does keep happening. And given that the challenge system is now in effect, should they consider switching things up?
I would be open to it. I have a sort of dastardly proposal that I that I think should, I don't know what it should be, what the gesture should be for hitters and catchers. But I think that if you're a pitcher and you're trying to challenge, which doesn't happen very often, obviously, and there is sort of a interesting subplot that I think our friend Jake Mintz explored on his podcast of like, why did Will Smith feel like he needed to challenge on Shohei's behalf, right? Like he was interpreting that as, oh, I should challenge. Shohei thinks there's something to challenge. I'm going to do the thing. I was like, well, Shohei not allowed to challenge as a pitcher, but then Will Smith thought, oh, I got to do it because my guy says that there's something wrong here. So like that's
I thought a little bit just kind of making sure, just, being a good battery mate, like making sure the umpire registered the challenge.
Maybe. Yeah. But you know what the signal for challenging should be for pitchers?
What?
Digging into the belt.
Oh.
What? You challenging? What other reason do you have to go in there?
Yeah. I'm sure they'd like that. That would help them get away with
They're
much
still
more.
digging. They're still digging into their belts all the time, Ben. You know what's in there? They really need to tuck in their shirts that much? No. They're still loading. They're still loading up. Yep. So this is a two birds, one stone sort of a situation because they're not really the ones who are challenging. And we've talked about the reasons why. And so have folks on teams. But if the signal to challenge is that and you're a pitcher, well, you just have to find a new spot to hide your gunk, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think it's a tricky thing because in a world where no one is trying to manipulate in a world where no one is trying to manipulate the challenge system, you could just say, "Oh, I didn't mean to challenge." And the umpire could say, "Cool, no sweat." But in the world we live in, you could conceive of a situation where a guy did mean to challenge and then receive some sort of signal from the dugout. That would never happen. I'm sure that they're not going to find a way to indicate to their guys that they should challenge. No. And then they realize, oh, that was a bad challenge. I shouldn't do it. And you do a take backsies. So I think you can't employ the reasonable solution to this problem, which is just to have the guy say, "Oh, I'm sorry, that was a mistake. We didn't mean to challenge," because they're all lying liars who we can't believe and trust. I mean, not all of them, but maybe, like Will Smith has that youthful face.
Yeah.
You don't think that a guy with a youthful face could be a liar? Have you ever seen Little Rascals?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think if this keeps happening, I think it's worth considering. Now, the players are encouraged to verbalize their challenge. That's
right.
what there's a MLB.com explainer. How is a challenge issued? The player taps his cap or helmet to alert the umpire to his desire to challenge the call. Players are also encouraged to verbalize their challenge to leave nothing to doubt, but the cap/helmet tap represents the official challenge. So you could say that you have to mandate the verbal challenge, but then, well, if you're a pitcher, and granted, maybe if you're a pitcher, you're not doing it or not supposed to do it that often anyway, but it might be hard to hear for the umpire if it's loud and there's a lot of crowd noise or something. So maybe you do need some sort of signal. And I'm thinking of, well, what could a different, of course, some silly ones could occur to you. I mean, you could do.
Well, it is challenging because I didn't mean to do that. It's challenging because, they're sending each other signals all the time. And so you need something that really is distinct and specific to, hey, I'm trying to challenge here.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So you could just flip the bird to the umpires. Just screw you. I'm challenging. I mean, Jarren Duran just did that to a fan the other day. Not the best, but also that was maybe not unprovoked. Maybe the fan said something nasty.
Can I say something about this? Because, look, I get it's not the best. And we have had issues with Jarren Duran in the past based on fan interactions, but more because of what he said than what he did. But I'm here to tell you this. If you shout what that fan shouted to him, if you shout it to anyone, but particularly someone who has been open and vulnerable about their own mental health struggles, including incidents of attempted self-harm, you're lucky he didn't go into the stands and beat you senseless. I'm sorry. Don't do that. It's a bad example. There are children present, but honestly, I think he was pretty restrained for what that fan said. Shame on you, fan. Ridiculous.
Yes.
Be a human being. My God.
That is bad. And it's bad that Duran then subsequently said that he wishes that he had never divulged that because the worst fans maybe are using that as ammunition against him. And so that's bad because then it discourages people from being frank and open about these things, which can help other people who have gone through the same thing. So
yes. And I think there's value in professional athletes, particularly male professional athletes, speaking about this stuff, because I do think that they serve as role models to demographics of young men who are very interior and could benefit from being able to talk about these things and ask for help. So I was very steamed, hardly the only one to be clear, but my goodness, be a person. Jeez Louise.
So flipping the bird at blue is probably out, but
Yeah, don't flip the bird at blue.
What
It
could
would be
you do?
so wild if the league's like, no, that's our preferred signal. That's our preferred sign is
Yeah.
for you to stand up there and go,
Yeah.
and I'm doing it, which everyone can see in this
Yeah.
visual medium that is podcasting.
The hat adjustment, that is kind of problematic because
What if you have to lift your batting helmet clean off your head? You know, what if you have to go like, whoop, whoop?
okay, well, yeah,
No, that's a
there'd be,
terrible solution.
it would take a little
Actually,
more time, but
It
it's
would take more time.
less open
Can't
to
have that.
misinterpretation because sometimes you have to adjust your batting helmet because sometimes
Right.
sometimes it's loose and you got to tamp it down or whatever, and sometimes it's just a habitual move that you make, and maybe you could condition yourself not to do that now, but yeah, sometimes you do want to just kind of tug on your cap or something. So like some kind of Macarena move or something.
What if you mimic throwing a flag like it's football?
Well, I was thinking that, like, what if each player just had a flag and they could just toss a little flag?
God,
That would be very
they
funny.
should each have little flags, Ben.
It would be
What a
very
great
funny.
It would be
would-
delightful if they
it
each
would-
had a little flag.
It would take
and then
more
they had to, like,
time. Yeah, then they'd have to stoop down and
unfurl it.
pick up the flag, which also
So
would be kind of
what?
funny. But
It would
there's
be
time
great
for that, I
because
guess.
There's
during the
time.
challenge.
There's a challenge going on.
Yeah.
They can pick up their litter while the challenge is challenging.
Yeah, or you could. Now I'm anti-scouting report card, but I guess you could have some kind of challenge card that you brandished,
red
maybe.
card.
Yeah, I think they had something like that in volleyball. I read, and also in volleyball, then like coaches can make a C shape with their hands instead of presenting the card to indicate
Okay.
a review, and that might be okay because it wouldn't be misinterpreted as anything else, I suppose. So if you just formed a C with
It's
your
kind of corny looking,
hands
though,
or
right?
yeah, I guess it is. So something that looks okay and is not potentially offensive, but also could not be misinterpreted as anything else, just kind of do some little shimmy, just like a little hippie shake. I don't know, just some sort of dance move would be kind of funny. A little hop. All these things could happen in the course of normal events, though.
Yeah,
So.
I think a challenge flag is the way to go because, if it's like a card, like you're pulling, like you're a soccer, are they refs? Are they umpires? What are they in soccer? What is the term for an official?
Yeah, refs, I think.
Refs? Is it refs? Okay.
Or just
What is-
official.
What is it in hockey? Are they refs also?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's really just baseball that's hanging out with umpires.
Yeah, I
Back
don't-
judges. It doesn't matter. So anyway, when they do their little thing, like sometimes they have to fumble around for it, it can get kind of stuck in stuff. It could get stuck in your pocket. A flag could just be hanging out the back. Like you could just have it hanging out of your back pocket. But then, is there danger in you sliding on it? But you have your gloves back there, like if you slide on those, is it really worse? Because like an NFL challenge flag, like that a coach would throw, there's like a little pocket of heavy, I think it's probably sand, so that when you throw it out, it like flurls and then it falls to the ground. So maybe that's a hazard. But I think that it would be the best solution. Maybe it might add too much time, but I don't think it would add that much time, and it would be funny.
Yeah, I guess. So is the tapping, is that sort of like a skeuomorph motion to suggest like the headset kind of? Because
No, because you would do like you do the two on the side of your head for the headset.
yeah, but
You do
sometimes
the-
you're holding a bat or you got a glove or you've got so maybe you just use one hand. Like, is there
You
significance? Is it
you
because
could do side? You could do side head.
side
You could do
head?
the side head. You could do like a manager asking for a replay review will often do the cans.
Yes,
Gesture on the sides of their heads.
right.
So a player calling for a challenge could do like a one-handed guy and go da da da.
Yeah, or
And
you
that's
could
like
do
a distinct action as opposed to just like jostling your cap or what have you.
yeah, or you could do like a phone call motion because it's sponsored by T-Mobile. T-Mobile would like that, I'm sure.
Yeah, that makes me not like it. I would otherwise be into it because I like the idea of them doing like the handset, like, hey, but then there's like, integration with a sponsor. Now I'm back out.
Yeah. Or what if you did like, because it's the Hawkeye system, what if you like put your arm out as if you were doing some falconry or something, like you were going to have, maybe that doesn't work, or you make some sort of hawk call, or I don't know, but there's got to be something.
Wait, I'm sorry. You want baseball players to be up there going, caw, caw, caw,
yes, that is what I want. Yeah.
Why wouldn't they just say challenge then? If it's a vocalization, why wouldn't they just go challenge?
Yeah. Well, maybe the caca would be louder, so it would break through.
You think that you could caca louder than you could yell challenge?
I think so, yeah. It's more of a piercing, just a different frequency. But
I think that it would be for some people, but some people aren't going to reach that register. I would even venture to say most wouldn't. Mm-hmm. So I think that the batter should have to turn all the way around and show his back to the pitcher, and that's the sign. And the catcher can lay down. And then the pitchers, as we've established, have to dig into their belts. What else would they be doing that for? Nothing.
Yeah.
Innocent angels, everyone.
Instead of the flag that you throw a glove, or you slap someone with a glove, like you're challenging them to a duel or something, or it's throwing the gauntlet.
Be great for like batter, catcher, umpire relations. And then again, what does the pitcher do? Because you can't have the pitcher. I love the idea of like, to indicate a challenge in a system, part of the appeal of which is that it happens so quickly. The pitcher has to walk to home plate and smack the umpire. And then a challenge has been issued. And I'm sure that the zone after that will be pristine, no bias, no issues.
Yeah.
I do wonder, I think you're right that probably Will Smith, just to return to the babyface liar known as Will Smith, I don't have any reason to think that Will Smith is a dishonest person. I just want to make clear. But he is very youthful in his face. He looks like a comic whose name I can never remember. Anyway, I like the idea that I was talking about this with somebody that, like, a catcher, it was suggested to me that there might be an easier time for the pitching team, not only in terms of the accuracy of the challenge, but in terms of sort of smoothing the way with the umpire, to have the catcher do it because, the catcher's there all the time and can have chatter with the umpire and can make it obvious, like, hey, you're calling a great zone. You just happen to miss one, buddy. Like, this is you weren't getting along. Smoothing the way, easy time between us. Whereas like there's something more fundamentally aggressive about the pitcher calling for a challenge. Mm-hmm. And so I like the idea of there being some sort of pitcher to catcher relay system. The flaw of that being that like the pitchers probably shouldn't challenge much at all. But anyway.
Okay. Well, write in. If you have
we're gonna get
silly
a lot of emails
or serious
well, and I look, I look forward to them because I think Raymond, hit on something real, which is now, I don't think that this is it doesn't seem like it's a big problem, right? Like we are able to readily identify some examples, which suggests there's room for improvement, but it doesn't seem like there's like a rash of unintentional challenges going on, but maybe room to improve nonetheless.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe like a spinning finger sign, not with the finger kind of, not the home run sign that the umpire does.
This is part of the problem.
I know. There's so many signals for everything. Everything can be interpreted, but kind of like a tape loop spinning, sort of like rewind. Let's see the replay there. Maybe another sort of skeuomorph. Though maybe if you're doing that, holding it up to your head, that might be kind of like a cuckoo.
Oh, like you're trying to say that they're bonkers in some way.
That might be
that wouldn't be good. Yeah, that doesn't seem like it would lend itself to good relations with.
Well, give us a solution. People write in podcast@fangraphs.com, something that would be clear and not misinterpreted, but also easy to signal because you got to do it quickly. And it's got to satisfy all these criteria. Or if you want to suggest a silly one, you can do that too. Also, in hockey, there are referees, but probably people usually say officials because some of the officials are referees and some of them are linesmen.
Right,
They're
yeah.
specifically monitoring the line.
Right, yeah.
And also, I mentioned the Astros earlier when we were talking about Imai. To be clear, they have had other Japanese players, Noriaoki and Yusei Kikuchi and Kazumatsui, et cetera. It's just that they've never signed someone directly from
out
Japan.
of
Yeah,
NPB.
so they've never sort of had to help someone get
With the
accustomed
acculturation
to
process.
their. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And also, update on Cutter Crawford, whom we talked about last time, because the mystery was revealed, the injury that he suffered last year.
Mm-hmm.
He has now his rehab has been derailed, unfortunately. He was on a rehab assignment, and now at least it's on hold for the time being. But as far as we know, not because he had a relapse when it comes to gardening and cranking and yanking his hose, but just because he hurt his forearm. And I think it's just the usual sort of pitcher having a forearm injury, which is quite demoralizing for Cutter Crawford. But as far as we know, no unusual circumstances, no gardening-related mishaps.
How hurt does he have to be before he is allowed to just garden again? You know,
Well,
like if
as he said, I've got a guy now, so he's not taking
got
any
a guy.
chances. Yeah.
yeah. Ben, can I tell you something very exciting?
Okay.
It's gardening related, so it's relevant to our baseball podcast.
Yeah, totally.
You made it relevant. So I have a little mobile, like elevated garden bed to do herbs because we got tired of buying herbs. You know, you buy herbs to cook with, and then you end up tossing half of them, particularly if they're very delicate herbs, and it feels like a waste. And they're so expensive, and there's all this single-use plastic involved a lot of the time. So we were like, oh, we'll get the little garden bed and we'll have some herbs. And it can be challenging to garden here in Arizona because it's so stinking hot so much of the time. And so I was just sort of like, okay, this round of herbs is a getting to know you exercise. And I'm sure that some of them will die. The English time is not doing well. The rest of them, though, thriving. I have 2 little peppers. I have 2 little hot peppers on one of my pepper plants.
Oh, well done.
Yeah, 2.
Got a
They're
green
not
thumb.
ripe yet.
I don't know
They're
if they're green peppers, but yeah.
Green peppers, but they will ripen, hopefully, to little red hot peppers. I'm so excited.
Nice. Playing pepper. Brought it back to baseball. There we go.
Playing pepper.
Okay. I will close with a little stat blasting.
They'll take a data set sorted by something like ERA minus or OBS plus, and then they'll tease out some interesting tidbit, discuss it at length, and analyze it for us in amazing ways. Here's today's Stat Blast.
Okay, so last time we talked about the offensive stats to start this season and how they looked a little bit different, and walks were up and home runs were down even relative to previous Aprils and everything. That was on Monday when we had that discussion. And Monday was an absolute offensive outburst. That was a hugely high-scoring day. The league as a whole hit 293, 367, 498. That's a 146 WRC plus, 384 WOBA with 37 dingers on that day alone. And because it's still fairly early in the season, that big day, that changed the league-wide offensive stats to an appreciable degree. So the league-wide
wild.
batting average went up from 235 to 237. OBP went up from 318 to 320. Slug went up 5 points from 375 to 380. Yeah, so WOBA went up 3 points, and that's exciting. But this was actually sort of historic. And there was a question about this in our Patreon Discord group, and it came from someone who went by the username Ila de Montecristo and said, today's games average 14.4 runs per game. That's a lot. I mean, that's both teams combined. I'll just read you the scores from that day because there were 10 games, and so there were a couple low-scoring ones, but it was 4-0, 6-2, 9-7, 16-5, 13-7, 11-10, 10-4, 13-6, 9-3, 8-1. There's some crooked numbers in there. So this supporter asked whether this was a lot, historically speaking. 14.4 runs per game. What is the highest average runs per game for a single day of baseball, maybe specifying a day where at least half the teams in the league played, if it was a day with very few games skewing this? So Michael Mountain, Frequent Stat Blast correspondent, newly upgraded to Frequent, is making good on that, answered this one. And this was, it turns out, an integration era record for the highest average run scoring on a day with at least 10 MLB games. There were 10 games on July 1st, 1936. A lot of offensive records set in the 1930s, rabbit ball. So on July 1st, 1936, there was an average of 15.3 runs per game, and there were 10 games despite the AL and NL only amounting to 16 active teams. The Cubs and Reds were idle. 3 teams hosted doubleheaders. So this is an integration era record. It's the most in 90 years. So well spotted. And I don't know what that means, if anything. Maybe it was a blip. Maybe it was an outlier, but I'm sort of surprised that a record high-scoring game came in mid-April, because you would expect later in the year when it's hotter and the ball's flying farther and everything. But no, this was notable. So we're certainly at the point of the season where one big day can completely change a player's stats. But a day that big, that can even have an impact on a league-wide level. So good one. Good eagle eye there. And a few more. Here is a question from Jacob, who says, as I write, the Angels-Yankees game is 8-8 in the 8th inning. And Jacob then had a footnote that said, before I finished writing this, Mike Trout hit a 2-run homer to give the Angels a 10-8 lead. He still got it. That was a wild game.
Yeah.
Judge hit a couple homers.
And then what happened?
Yeah. Trout hit 2, Judge hit 2.
Yeah.
And that was part of that Monday offensive outburst. So Jacob says, this inspired a thought because it was 8-8 in the 8th. What is the record for most consecutive innings where the score matched the inning? That is, has a game ever been 1-1 in the first, 2-2 in the second, 3-3 in the third, etc.? Then 2 similar questions. How many consecutive innings has the combined score matched the inning count? So 1-0, 2-0, 2-1, 3-1, 3-2, etc. For both methods, what's the highest inning for which this has been true? Has a game ever been 14-14 in the 14th? Has the total score ever been 18 in the 18th? I feel like all these should be relatively searchable for someone with better tools / SQL knowledge than me. And that is, in fact, Michael, who says, most consecutive innings where the score matched the inning at some point during the inning is 4. That has happened 8 times on record, most recently in a Rangers-Angels game on July 9th, 2025. It was briefly 3-3 in the bottom of the third, briefly 4-4 in the top of the fourth, 5-5 through the top of the fifth, and 6-6 through the bottom of the sixth. If you require the streak to start in the first inning, there's one 4-inning streak on record where it was 1-1 in the first, 2-2 in the second, 3-3 in the third, and 4-4 in the fourth. Milwaukee at Minnesota, May 13th, 1990. The latest in a game that the tied score has equaled the inning number happened in Cleveland on July 10th, 1932. The Philadelphia A's scored 2 runs in the top of the 9th to take the lead, and Cleveland got one back in the bottom of the 9th to send the game to extras, tied 15-15. And the game made it to the 15th inning, still tied 15-15, and neither team scored in the 15th. Philly got 2 in the 16th to take a 17-15 lead, but Cleveland answered right back to send the game to the 17th inning, tied 17-all. And that's the record. The A's won the game 18-17 in 18 innings. I miss 18-inning games. Those were fun sometimes. Sometimes. Same questions, but looking at combined score instead of each team's run total individually equaling the inning number. There's a clear standout here. Rockies at Reds, June 7th, 2018. It was 1-0 in the first, 1-all in the second, 2-1 in the third, 3-1 in the fourth, 3-2 in the fifth, briefly 4-2 in the top of the sixth, 5-2 in the seventh, briefly 5-3 in the bottom of the 8th, 5-4 in the 9th, and 5-5 in the 10th. And the Reds went on to win 7-5 in 13 innings. The Brewers and Royals did play a game in 1998 where the combined score added up to the inning number in 11 different innings, but they weren't consecutive. That was a 15-inning game. Finally, the latest inning on record in which the combined score added up to the inning number is the 18th inning. This has happened 7 times, most recently, and with the biggest score differential on August 24th, 2013, when the Diamondbacks scored 5 runs against the Phillies in the top of the 18th to briefly make the score 11-7. They won 12-7. Whew. Well, that was good, and kudos to Michael for looking not just the end of inning results, but also the mid inning results. Particularly impressive, going above and beyond. Okay, here's another one. This one came in on Sunday from Tom, Patreon supporter, who says, Jose Ramirez homered against his 29th team last night, April 11th, against Atlanta. How many players have homered against all other teams while playing for only one team? I assume this has happened only during the interleague era. And slightly less related, Tom says, I was wondering what the most homers a player has had in a career where all homers came against different teams. So not having 2 homers against the same team, not necessarily full career numbers, but up to a specific point is fine too. So, Michael says, as of the end of the 2025 season, only 5 players had homered against 29 other teams while representing a single club. Aaron Judge, Rafael Devers with Boston, Austin Riley, Pete Alonso with the Mets, and Shohei Ohtani with the Dodgers. So wow, Shohei did that quickly. He hasn't been a Dodger that long. Attached is a spreadsheet showing the active players with at least 1 career home run and which teams they have still not homered against. The question asked about that being all with a single franchise. I listed each player only once connected with the franchise for whom they had homered against the most opponents, which is not necessarily their current team. I'll link to that spreadsheet. For the second question, 1 player in MLB history hit 16 total career home runs against 16 distinct clubs. I mean, this is good trivia question territory. I mean, no one would ever get it. How would you ever possibly get it? But Ryan Christensen, outfielder for the 1998 to 2001 A's, never hit more than 5 homers in a season and never repeated against any opposing team. No other player in the retrosheet era has hit as many home runs to start a career, all against different opponents, regardless of how many they went on to hit. That's amazing, Michael editorializes. But you know what? He's right. That the one guy who did that, 16 homers against 16 different clubs, that's also the most even to start a career by anyone who went on to hit plenty of other homers against other teams. I mean, that seems somewhat surprising, though I guess if you're someone who maybe has more staying power than Ryan Christensen proved to have, then you wouldn't even get to the point of having 16 homers against 16 teams because you would have doubled up at some point. But still, that almost makes me want to get Ryan Christensen on the pod and be like, were you aware of this? Like, is this weird? Could your career have been sustained if you had played more opponents and different unique opponents because you could have kept hitting homers against them? Was it that like the book on Ryan Christensen was such that once you saw him one time, he was a solved science, like, you know, but like the first time you faced him, he was automatically going to homer or something? I mean, I guess he didn't homer in every game, but still, it probably means nothing. But it's so weird that it almost makes me wonder whether there was something about Ryan Christensen that made it possible for teams to like figure him out after they had faced him one time. Probably not. Do you think Ryan Christensen is aware that he hit his 16 homers against 16 different teams? Do you think he would care if he knew?
I don't know if he would care, but I bet he was made aware at a certain point. But it probably came later in that run than you would necessarily expect.
Yeah, or even after his career.
Maybe
potentially.
Maybe.
Huh. I wouldn't be surprised if that was breaking news to him, though. Okay.
Maybe.
Andrew, Patreon supporter, says, when is the last time pitchers from each team caught a pop-up in the same game? Tanner Bybee and Michael Wacha have done so in the first 4 innings of the April 6th Kansas City-Cleveland game. And that does seem like it would be kind of rare, right? Because, you know, pitchers are always pushed out and every other infielder is rushing out to save the pitcher. The challenge of actually trying to catch a pop-up, which I think would be a bit, I don't know, not emasculating, almost insulting. Like, you don't think I can catch this pop-up? I'm a professional athlete, sir. But they don't often get the opportunity to. And I guess probably most pop-ups are not in the pitcher's range, right? Probably a lot of pop-ups are in someone else's area. Anyway, Michael says, looks like this happens once or twice a year on average, though it's slightly rarer recently. I might have guessed even a little rarer than that. The last time this happened was in Colorado on July 18th, 2025. Kyle Freeland caught a pop-up in the top of the first, and Chris Paddock caught a pop-up in the bottom of the second. We hadn't seen it before that since 2022, when it happened twice. There are games where pitchers have combined for 3 or even 4 pop-ups caught, but never where both teams had a pitcher catch multiple pop-ups. So, okay. So, yeah, maybe we've already gotten this year's instance of the both pitchers in a game catching pop-ups game out of the way. Maybe we've already seen the 2026 edition of that.
Maybe.
I guess it would be getting a little rarer over time just because fewer batted balls, fewer balls in play. And I don't know, maybe pitchers are just even more than they used to be getting kind of pushed out of the way and other defenders are taking precedence there. That could be. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
And Scott says, Matt Wallner, who in 2025 drove himself in 22 times but drove in everyone else just 18 times, started 2026 with 3 solo homers for his only RBI of the year. And Scott says, I was at the game where he broke this streak and drove in a teammate. And as of this email, which was 5 days ago, he's up to 2 teammates driven in. What is the latest in a year that a player has gone before he drove in a teammate? That is, what is the highest number of solo homers to start a season before getting some other kind of RBI or a multi-run home run? Okay. All right. The record is 6. Simple answer. The record is 6, set by Tyler O'Neill in 2024. And of course, Tyler O'Neill, famous for his now snapped streak of opening day dingers. So I guess that tracks that he'd get that opening, not that they have to be solo, but the record is 6, set by Tyler O'Neill in 2024. He hit 6 solo home runs in the first 11 games for the Red Sox that year before driving in Jarren Duran on April 10th for his 7th RBI of the season. All right. And Scott's second question is, the Tampa Bay Rays aren't off to a great start, but they had a lead at some point in each of their first 10 games, even though they were 5-5 in those games. What is the latest a team has gone in which they had a lead in every game? The obvious candidates are teams that won a lot of games at the beginning of the season, the 2023 Rays, the 1984 Tigers, or maybe it's a team that had one of the best regular seasons ever, the 2001 Mariners. But maybe there's a more surprising team that is also on this list, or maybe the question can be tweaked to ask what's the latest that a team with a 500 record or worse had a lead in every game to start a season. So, Michael says, before we get into the gory details, it's probably good to note up top that about 40% of games have a lead change. Also, if you win a ball game, by definition, you had a lead at some point. Winning by walk-off counts as having a lead during the game for the purposes of this analysis. Pedantry be damned. And I'm going to ignore the rare edge cases where a team was trailing from start to finish and then was awarded a victory by forfeit. This reminds me of a recent Sam newsletter where he looked at just like what's the typical highest win probability in a game that a losing team has, like on average, how close to winning is a team that goes on to lose at its height. And it's surprisingly high. Like, you know, most teams that lose like a high percentage, at least were favored by win probability to win at some point then. Okay, since virtually every game, Michael says, is a loss for one of the participating teams, it's more informative to say that 40% of all losses involve blowing a lead. What makes the Rays start interesting is not that they led in each of their first 10 games, but that they led in each of their first 5 losses. If we use this metric, we're implicitly dealing with the problem of some teams being better than others because we're considering only the games in which a team lost. By pure luck, having a lead in each of your first 5 losses has about a 1% chance of occurring. However, there have been more than 2,500 team seasons on record in the retrosheet era, 1912 to present, so a 1% event happening at least once in that data set would be expected. Indeed, it would be orders of magnitude more surprising if this hadn't happened before. And of course, it has with even longer streaks. There's a lot of baseball. That's often the moral of the story in our Stat Blast. There's been a lot of baseball. I'm going to refer to games with no lead changes as decisive, i.e. a decisive win or a decisive loss, and games with a lead change as competitive. We can answer the original question both in terms of most games played or most losses accumulated before a decisive loss, but they turn out to be the same answer. The team that started the season with the longest streak of games that were either decisive wins or competitive games, so they led in every game to start the season, is the 2005 Chicago White Sox. And hey, they went on to win a World Series. Through May 14th, they had played 37 games, won 27, and their 10 losses were all competitive. There had been a lead change. That mark of 10 consecutive losses all being competitive is also the most to start a season. Returning to the figure cited earlier that about 40% of all losses are competitive, a 10-game streak of competitive losses to start the season is about a 1 in 8,000 event. So pretty close to being in line with the number of team seasons on record. The team with the second longest streak of games played before a decisive loss is the 1955 Brooklyn Dodgers, another champion who made it only 25 games into the season before suffering their first decisive loss, but their record coming into the decisive loss was 22-3. And that concludes today's Stat Blast, and I suppose also today's episode. Good stat blasting. I like when listeners notice seemingly anomalous things, and then they flag them for us. And then Michael or someone else finds out that, actually kind of unusual, which is not always the case. Sometimes if baseball were different, how different would it be? Not that different. Sometimes these things are not that unusual. But even then, it's nice to know. It's nice to get a baseline of something like what percentage of games feature a lead change. We learn a lot in the course of our stat blasting and podcasting. So thanks to everyone for keeping the questions coming. That'll do it for today. Thanks as always for listening, and special thanks for supporting financially, which you can do by going to patreon.com/effectivelywild and signing up to pledge some monthly or yearly amount to help keep the podcast going, help us stay ad-free, and get yourself access to some perks, as well as this week's full Friday episode. The following 5 listeners have already signed up: AJ Taylor, Matt McPhillips, Scott Moling, Nathan Winder, or Winder, and Nick Tarpley. Thanks to all of you. Patreon perks include a fully unlocked weekly regular episode of the podcast, a monthly bonus episode, our Patreon Discord group, exclusive live streams, personalized messages, prioritized email answers, shoutouts at the end of episodes, potential podcast appearances, FanGraphs memberships, and more. Check out all the offerings at patreon.com/effectivelywild. If you are a Patreon supporter, you can message us through the Patreon site. If not, you can contact us via email. Send your questions, comments, intro and outro themes to podcast@fangraphs.com. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Effectively Wild on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and other podcast platforms. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/effectivelywild. You can find the Effectively Wild subreddit at r/effectivelywild. And you can check the show notes in the podcast post at FanGraphs or Patreon if you're a supporter, or the episode description in your podcast app for links to the stories and stats we cited today. Thanks to Shane McKeon for his editing and production assistance. We will be back with one more episode a little later this week. Talk to you then.
Just a couple of baseball nerds. They'll still be speaking statistically, rambling romantically, pontificating pedantically, bantering bodily, drafting discerningly, giggling giddily, equaling effectively wild.